it's Laura from Laura Walmwell Photography, and today I am joined by Emily Fisher of Scratch and Sniff Canine Services for another episode of the Southwestern Ontario Pet Collective. Hi, Emily. I am so excited to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So, you have been a dog trainer for quite some time now. I'd love to
hmm
know how you got started in training.
hmm So, as a child, I had the aspirations of being a vet, as many children do, interested in working with animals. And I discovered it was just kind of not the field. I'm not so interested in the medical side of it. I find science interesting, but not so much translating chemical equations as we had to do to get all the prerequisites for it. So I ended up going another direction with schooling, thinking that I'd left the animal dreams behind, and I actually ended up circling back after going to university for a degree totally unrelated to anything animal related. When I moved back to Toronto after going to school, I worked in a vet clinic for a little while, which kind of did seal that wasn't really the field for me. And then I got into dog walking. So I think that can be a really nice entry point. Getting into training, I think it is good to have somebody that you're working with. So I was working with two quite experienced walkers to begin with. And from there, I started my own walking business. I got into training. I was working with private training as well as working with a school in Toronto called Who's Walking Who. Moved on from there to another school where I was a head instructor. So I had quite a lot of just kind of experience with multiple dogs. I was fostering dogs, walking dogs, working as an assistant in classes before head instructor. And then after a number of years on that, moving to Guelph and actually setting up my own facility in downtown Guelph.
So, how did you find your particular style and method of training?
So that came about through doing things in a way that I would not recommend at this point. And I think that is the direction that a lot of trainers actually end up going. They figure out what not to do before they figure out what to do. So early on, actually, when I was in university, I had a dog. My partner had a dog, and he had a lot of behavior issues. He was quite aggressive with people, with other dogs, just generally very wired and a very fairly large as well. All things considered, he could have been bigger, but he was around 95 pounds or so. So we hired a trainer locally up where I was going to school in Peterborough, and we got some very, very, very bad advice, and we followed it pretty closely, and we did end up changing training methods and saw a vet behaviorist actually here in Guelph, and unfortunately, it ended up with a behavioral euthanasia for him. So I think it's very unfortunate that we ended up going that route with that outcome. I think the nice thing though is that I do know what it's like to live with a dog like that. I do know what it's like to use those methods to kind of see things deteriorate, to see things seem to get better before that deterioration. So I have all of that lived experience as well as the I don't want to call it theoretical experience, but the broader knowledge around what was actually happening at that point, what was actually happening with that dog as we were going through that. So I think despite it being a sad outcome, it was something that gives me a lot of empathy for owners and owners who are using methods that they might be even coached on with other trainers, but could ultimately be really damaging for the dog, particularly when we're looking at dogs that are coming into situations with pre-existing, high anxiety, fear, and aggression.
So, are there any particular, whether it's behaviors or specializations that are particular to you?
Yeah, I tend to do a lot of work with dog aggression. I would say the large majority of private training that I do is with dogs with some sort of aggressive behavior, quite frequently, dog to dog, dog to human, or bordering on that with, severe reactivity, even if they aren't following it up with bites or given opportunities to bite. So I find those cases to be quite rewarding because you can see such differences in the dogs once we have all the training on track, just to see them kind of like just like take a breath and be able to come down from this constant emotional high that they can be on, especially living in an urban area where there's, just triggers all over the place, even when they're in their house sometimes.
So what's your favorite thing to help dogs with within your business? Is it the reactivity?
Yeah, I would say that. I'm also quite liking a newer service that I'm offering now with the emergence of COVID. I had to do, like most business owners, a lot of restructuring. I was thinking through, what does puppy play look like in puppy socialization class? And there's a lot of close contact between people. There's a lot of management of the puppies. Puppies, just because they're young doesn't mean that they have good social skills. They need a lot of help developing that. So if there's, something happening, I need to be able to get to the puppies quickly. If there's people there, getting bodies close together, all that sort of thing. So I ended up restructuring some services to offer the obedience and manners separate from the play and socialization element of it. So I now have a drop-off service, which luckily has been able to run through the lockdowns with permission through bylaw and public health, which has been fantastic because there's just so many puppies out there who are coming into homes, and people are feeling completely, stunted in their ability to get their puppies out and doing things.
There are a ton of folks who have brought new puppies into their homes throughout the pandemic. I know we've had a couple of questions about when is a good time to seek out training for your puppy. As well, what are some key behaviors that your puppy should be learning?
Ultimately, it's right away. So, we look at children, for instance, they don't not learn until they go to kindergarten at 4 or so years of age. There is so much early education that's happening with parents and caregivers right from birth. Developmentally, there's so many changes that happen in that time. So I think puppies are very similar. This doesn't mean that they need to learn all of these formal, like, obedience behaviors of, like, sit only here and walk only there. It's not that. It's about meeting their developmental needs, meeting their socialization needs. And I think that's the really big thing that sometimes gets a little bit confused. A dog can learn to sit or lie down at literally any point in their life. I took an 8-year-old rescue into my house and adopted her. She kind of knew sit when I had her. She was a stray on the street, who knows what her background was. And I went on to compete in rally obedience with her. And she was 8 when I got her, and she knew basically nothing, right? So you don't need to focus just on these hard skills of, changing positions or anything like that when they're a puppy. There are some things we want to get in place early. But really, we need to look at the socialization side of things. So exposure to the broader world, like knowing what is the world going to hold for your dog as an adult, and how can we cultivate positive experiences and exposure to these things and to things that resemble these scenarios, right? So if you have a puppy and you're thinking, maybe I'm going to have kids in 3 or 4 years, it is going to be really, really important to find situations to expose your puppy to children in a way that is really enjoyable for your puppy. So not children that are going to, pick them up awkwardly or drop them or run past screaming and scare them, but actually cultivate good relationships with children so that you can more easily make that transition once you, have the baby into the home.
So when we hear the term socialization, it's not even necessarily just introducing the pet to various types of people. It can even be things in the environment too.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So you can kind of think of, the world broken down into different types of categories. So, we have people, and there's going to be a huge range of what people are, changing from like size and race and sex or gender and presentation and how they carry themselves. That could be people carrying objects. A lot of dogs, they're fine with people, but people carrying bulky objects, that's suddenly something to be concerned about. So there's, the people side of it, and that doesn't mean meet and greet and make friends with every single one of those people. It's about being able to watch them at a distance and be okay with their existence in the environment without being concerned about it, but also without having to run over there and be, you know, the Walmart greeter of the neighborhood. Same thing with dogs. They really don't need to be going up and meeting every dog. And I actually prefer to not have on-leash greetings between dogs. It can kind of cultivate an expectation of every dog I see I should be able to greet. And then they start to get frustrated, and you can get that barking and lunging coming from that frustration of wanting to go greet and now not being allowed to as they get older, and you know, you want to just go for a walk and not greet every dog. So having social contact is really important. I don't want to minimize that, but it's kind of one of those, there's a time and place for it. It is not every person, every dog. So we have that like social part of socialization, and I think that's where the term kind of gets confused between social contact and socialization, meaning stuff like noises, and that could be anything from like a beep on the computer. So many dogs out there are afraid of electronic beep noises, or like a coffee grinder or blender or vacuum, or noises like fireworks or gunshots or other sorts of like all-encompassing outdoor like big noises, as opposed to like the little beep on the computer. So looking at different types of noises, just living in a household will obviously have exposure to stuff like a beeping microwave, but you won't necessarily get the exposure to the thunderstorms of the fireworks, especially this time of year when we're just getting less of that. So can be a little bit hard to replicate that sort of thing, but sound CDs, even going onto YouTube, there's a lot of weird stuff on YouTube that are just, you know, 10 hours of fireworks playing on repeat, and making sure that exposure to this is not fear invoking, that it's just something that becomes background noise. Same thing with footing. Walking on carpet is very different than walking on hardwood floor or laminate floor, or anything slippery like that, sidewalk grates. So we can kind of look at socialization as what is going to exist in your dog's environment, even on the smallest scale, like my pup's been a little bit weird about clods of grass recently. There's been a couple of puppy eating clods of grass, which has stared her down on the trail. And she's like, no, you're coming for me. So stuff like that, which is, you know, very normal for a puppy, especially pre-adolescent. She's 18 weeks, to be a little bit suspicious about that sort of thing. And I think it's stuff that we humans, we just simply don't notice because we don't have a dog's eye view, but stuff that we kind of need to incorporate into your dog's life. And if you walk only around your block in your neighborhood, that dog's world is a very, very small world that you're socializing them to. There might be clods of grass there, but you know, there's a lot of stuff which is not in just your neighborhood. So walking in new locations, walking in forested areas versus urban areas, versus a downtown urban area versus a residential area. Just that kind of broad exposure beyond your house, backyard, and immediate neighborhood is really important.
Does the socialization process differ at all for older adopted animals? I know lots of folks have brought in rescues to their homes this during the pandemic as well.
Yes, and a lot of people are having a lot of trouble finding them too. There's been a little bit of a run on them as people are working from home. So socialization is very much like a biologically predetermined period of time in the early part of a creature's life. So if we're looking at that critical period of socialization for puppies, it's ending in that 12 to 16 week range. So that doesn't mean that there's suddenly one day that they go from being totally malleable and love everything to totally shut down. It's not that black and white, but you do get this kind of gradual close off of starting to go, that's new and not okay, rather than that's new, that's cool, I wonder what it is, let's go check it out. So you start to get less of that curiosity. And how this plays out is of course going to be very different from dog to dog. There's going to be some puppies that really just out of the gates of that nervousness, and some puppies that out of the gates are just like, you could do everything wrong and they would still turn out fine. There's a lot that kind of goes into this, but broadly speaking, you don't get that when you're getting an older dog. So what you get with older dog is that you have, they're developmentally already stable. You're not getting developmental changes. You're just going to be getting changes, assuming that, they're past that 2 to 3 year mark. You're getting more changes based on what are they exposed to, what changes have happened in their life. So if you're getting an older, I don't say older because 3-year-old dog isn't old, but a non-puppy rescue from somewhere that was very rural, that they were a free roaming northern dog from northern Ontario or northern Manitoba, or a pot cake or something like that. They have a very, very different life in those free roaming kind of feral colony type environment versus being put into an urban home where they're very, very restricted. So even though you don't have those changes in like that technical socialization, if we're going to use the word like in its kind of more technical aspect, you don't have the changes happening with regard to developmental changes, but you do have changes happening with regard to the dog's been plucked out of one environment and put into something very, very different. So what we tend to get instead is that it can almost look a little bit similar, but I think there's a lot more of a I don't want to say more cautious, but that honeymoon period, forgot that word, the honeymoon period that you can have with a new rescue. Oftentimes, in that first month or so, they are nervous. So instead of having a like barky, lungy response to things, they inhibit. So they'll tend to be, a little bit shy looking, or they tend to stay very close to you on walks. And then after a little bit, they start to pull forward a bit more and go, now I have the confidence to be able to deal with this environment. So sometimes you need to support them a lot in going from, coming out of their shell, but coming in their shell in a way that exposes them to very manageable environments, that gives them a lot of support in going, I can see that thing makes you nervous because you're staying away from it, you're pretending it doesn't exist. If your alternative is to go, now I need to bark at you, let's give you another alternative to go, okay, I can see this scares you a little bit, let's give you a little bit of space, let's use food, let's let you approach on your own terms with curiosity and not feeling compelled to approach, and cultivate that a little bit differently than seeing it as changes in development.